and then people can just come watch the beginning if they miss it. And I was wondering, unless anyone has a blocking concern, since we've all been in a Zoom together recently, if we could just like skip over the introductions, because they take up a lot of time and we all kind of know each other now. Is that good? All right. So I made a PowerPoint over the last like 24 hours to kind of just like organize my thoughts. And I'm going to try to keep it short because I really want to hear from you guys. Like I've talked to myself and to my partner a lot. I'd love to hear other perspectives. So here we go. So I took this abolition, okay, I put this abolition, SDE and Abolition in the anarchist education group because there's all the anarchists that I know are abolitionists, and it fits closely because anarchists reject institutions of government control. Prisons would be, you know, really violent aspect of government control the anarchists would be against. I took this the abolition. I put what abolition means to me is I believe in the complete abolishment of the carceral, prison, and criminal injustice system in the United States and how it is exported throughout the world. And, you know, on a fundamental level, there isn't any compromise there. And then, you know, and then beyond that, this believing that basic necessities such as food, shelter, and freedom are what really makes our community secure. As such, our work is part of global struggles against inequality and powerlessness. The success of the movement requires that it reflect communities most affected by the prison industrial complex. And because we seek to abolish the prison industrial complex, we cannot support any work that extends its life or scope. So I took that from the Critical Resistance website and their organization. And that's like the description of what they do, but it also kind of describes how I, like the lens that I look through what I do with my time, how I contribute to, or don't contribute to institutions. And the quote feels really like the best definition of me to being an abolitionist. And then I want to continue the conversation about who we leave behind, like as we leave the conventional school system and start school system, like little mini schools, or we take our kids out of school and create these utopian environments, who we're leaving behind. And I feel like we have a responsibility to address that. Let me see. Welcome, people who've just come in. I just kind of got started, so I'm sure you guys can.
Hi, I'm late. It's Alex.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Sonia. I was just starting on this first slide and describing kind of how anarchy and abolition fit together for me. And then this was came from the Critical Resistance website, which kind of like was a lens that I look through how my actions are either like promoting white supremacy and the prison industrial complex on a fundamental level, or if they're helping to abolish it. And so that's like a really like a big part of what my actions are as a person. And then I was wanting to, I started expanding that to who we leave behind in the conventional school system, and how, like, as an abolitionist, I feel a responsibility to those people we've left behind, because it's part of the carceral system. The school system is a part of white supremacy. And I think by just opting out, we're really keeping our privilege. So I just have a few slides about the prison system. Some, like, you know, these are dated, but they're still really serious. Obviously, each one of these are really shocking, and we all know that the prison industrial complex especially and purposefully incarcerates Black, brown, and bodies almost exclusively when you look at the numbers. So so there's and see how many people are in jail. So, and then I have another, I think I have another one just with the youth, but around 45,000 youth are in prison right now or on any given day. And interesting, while I was looking this up, I found that there was youth incarceration has been lowering since 2007. And I was I didn't do any further research, but I was maybe that's video games that's caused the lower because people are staying home instead of interacting on the streets. That might be the reason for that. And then there's also been a lowering of youth incarceration during the pandemic. And I wonder if that's because people aren't interacting with school and the police presence at school. So they're not being incarcerated there. Black youth are 9 times more likely to receive than white youth to receive an adult prison sentence. And then who are incarcerated youth? All of my family members and my friends who have a mentally ill or neurodivergent child, or and doubly so if they have a Black or brown neurodivergent or mentally ill child, are desperate for new options for their child's future beyond the carceral system. In Oregon, it has some of the worst mental health access for youth in the country, 47th in the nation or something like that. And my nephew and his mother sat in the OHSU hospital for 11 days when he was having a mental health crisis, looking for help, which he never got. The police were called a few times, so. So 2/3 of confined youth are in the most restrictive facilities. So when I'm bringing all these things up, I just we know as people in SDE that this isn't how you heal. This is not how you treat people, and this isn't how we do youth, right? And it's just really disturbing to me that this is still occurring, and because it's our focus with youth and education, I feel it's their responsibility to look at this. So here's a bunch more on school to prison pipeline and the foster care to prison pipeline. Really, I'm just I don't want to read it. I won't read through it, but the school is a racist institution that's made to perpetuate white supremacy. So we were benefiting from that. And then then to the side, we don't have to change anything about it because it's not really affecting the SDE community in the way that it's affecting Black and brown communities all across the country. So that's going to bring me around to ACEs. I don't know if people are familiar with ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. I've got a link here when I share the slideshow. You can check it out. There's a TED Talk on childhood trauma and how it affects health across lifespan. 68% of adults have at least one ACE, and 12%, or 1 in 8 people, have 4 or more ACEs. And when I was thinking that you can certainly have ACEs across the races and across communities, but I think what kind of access you have and the answers to supports to help you in healing are going to be radically different depending on where you live and the money and access that you have. And when I was looking this up, I was looked a little deeper and found some graphics that included these adverse community environments that are things that we can do something about. And so this is kind of the pyramid of ACEs, this generational embodiment, historical trauma, social local context, then the adverse childhood experiences come from that. Disrupted neurodevelopment. How do you go the other way? Sorry, remember to go all the way back in. Oh, how do I get out? There we go. There. Excuse me. And so where are we as educators in interacting with the youth? How can we, where does education play into that? So then there's trauma-informed care. And so this is the opposite of trauma-informed care. This is re-traumatization. And so when we look at, these in systems and relationships, obviously, public school and conventional school systems are re-traumatizing communities and youth that have already been traumatized, and they certainly aren't lending to a trauma-informed environment, or that is just like there's just seeds of that being planted across, it's difficult and it's not prevalent. I was introduced to this while serving as as training to help on the reservation with a teen parent home. They were trying to integrate this into their school system because they're trying to heal from intergenerational trauma from the missionary schools that were only closed in the 60s that existed right there, and all the sexual abuse and trauma that comes in that community from that. So here are the guiding principles of trauma-informed care. And I feel like that these resonate with self-directed education. These are really easy to accomplish in the self-directed space. And if you're trying to do these things in the conventional space, it just keeps not working. And so, but we have that information, right? And I think that who else but SDE can advocate with lived experience and data and tell people that we need why trauma informed and how it works and how it's worked for our communities. So these are just some random last thoughts. As I've said a couple times, I feel a responsibility coming from the privileges that I've had and the privileges I have to interact in the SDE community at all. Some of the things that may be extreme, but I call them harm reduction. We could promote and support trauma-informed school reform, or SDE, we already do that, but how can we do it more, bigger, more outreach, more information, and compulsory laws. I love one of those talks by Carol Black. She speaks to that directly, just ending compulsory laws, protect families from incarceration and the system, get cops out of schools, and racist standardization in grades. I think that would also open up the space for Indigenous communities to really allow them to create their own educational systems outside of Western ideas. And then on a bigger macro scale, I get really angry about the pushing, of Carol Black's film Schooling the World and the ongoing missionary and progressive schooling outreach in the Indigenous and developing world. I feel protective. I don't want them spreading conventional school and capitalist school everywhere. And I just think it's important to confront and name conventional schooling and testing as the oppressive and racist, it's under there, isn't it? Racist and oppressive institution it is, and that we need to radically rethink its role and structure. And when I first got into SDE, I was really wanting to be accommodating for conventional schooling, and I was annoyed Alanis Morris. I was like, I'm an unschooler, but it's fine if you go to conventional school. I'm like, no, there's some fundamental reasons we're not in school, and when can we start talking about that? And so yay, this is when we maybe can start talking about it. Thank you guys so much for listening. I took up a good amount, not too much time. Whew. love to hear anyone's thoughts. Just jump in.
Okay, I'm gonna go first if it's okay. Okay, Brooklyn and I should say, have talked about this quite a bit at different times. And she's been like an inspiration for me, and she knows that I've said that. But okay, so I have a master's degree in social work. I spent years and years being educated and learning all these things and techniques and methods and all these things of working within this system that we have to try to, I mean, it's just so futile. It's like the Borg, you know, and you, so I have been working for the past 10 years to free myself, obviously, from that mindset, and have to deal with a lot of the complicity that I had throughout the years working within the laws and the rules of our system and actively oppressing people as a person who is supposed to be trying to do the opposite, right? So I worked in hospitals, I worked in residential youth facilities, I worked in SA response teams, I worked in just all of it. I was frontline and all the different things I did. I did hospice also. So I am so deeply concerned about my fellow professionals who are trying so hard to do, and not all social workers are completely in the mainstream. I mean, there are definitely, you can find some, there's one called Decolonizing Social Work. You can find some people who are actively trying to get out of the system. But I was so convinced for so long that I could work within the system to change it, and have been so completely convinced otherwise that I am just so happy to be here and having this conversation. I'm going to stop there because honestly, Brooklyn knows I could talk about this for hours. I'm going to stop there. But yeah, it's... Ugh.
I'm curious to hear people's thoughts about, I'm with you on feeling like I am done with the institutions, but I think that most people in them aren't, both kids and parents. And so there's the like practical side of I work and my partner works and the kids have to be somewhere during the day, and you know, we pay taxes and those go to schools, but we don't have extra money to do whatever. But then there's also the part of I'm scared that when my kids grow up and have to participate in the world as it is, that they will not succeed in capitalism. They will not be able to get out there. Do you have thoughts on the path towards abolition from that perspective of meeting people where they are and making it possible to move out of those institutions?
May I add a quick comment on that? I think that it's quite presumptuous to assume that capitalism is going to be surviving by the time that our children are our age, or that it's going to look anything like it does today. And I'm trying to remember the Agile Learning Center network just came with a new slogan this year. It was like preparing children for the uncertain future or something like that. And when I talk to people, I talk about that, like, to think that any curriculum today is going to prepare our children for the future is ridiculous, when, you know, the world is never mind all the emergencies going on in the world, but just the pace of how things develop is going so quickly that the best way to prepare, if what you're looking to do with child rearing, and I would argue that preparation is not what you should be doing with child rearing. What you should be doing with child rearing is letting children enjoy being children. But if you are going to look at it from that perspective, and it's fine to have some of that, I'm certainly nervous when I think about my own children. Oh my, what are they going to do when they're older? The best thing that you can do for them is to enable them to be self-directed, to be able to research and ask questions and have confidence and all of that. And certainly that doesn't come from conventional schooling. That comes from this methodology. So that's kind of, that's the answer I give.
I'm so glad you added that about preparing, Alex, because the minute you said that, I was like, oh, fuck though, are we just talking about how we as adults are preparing children for something? Because that's a little adultist as well. So I'm glad you said that before I felt the need to. But I was unschooled, and honestly, participating in capitalism in this world when you are white and have that privilege and the leg up is not difficult. It's figuring out how to do as little of it as possible, which is my struggle. It's like, I'm sitting here, like I can check that box, make my money, and then I have all this other energy and time to try and find the ways where I don't participate in capitalism, and where I do take down these systems and where I push towards abolition. And I feel like being self-directed gave me that freedom to think in those ways, and it didn't keep me from being able to participate in capitalism in any way. It's the other stuff that's harder for a white woman.
Well, there was a few things that came to mind that I was like climate change, robots, AI, and then also it's not really about you. It's not about like the white people that have been like not you specifically, Emil, but it's not about us or those of us who have been benefiting from this white supremacist school system or the capitalist system, right? And I mentioned climate change because it's just like, when I think about my children's future, and it's so uncertain because these things are so entrenched and we're unwilling to change them. And then the options are suddenly like getting really grim. And then I like Alexander, you know, saying maybe they should just play, and we should be like showing them a lived experience of liberation by letting them do that.
So I want to piggyback off of that, showing them the lived experience phrase. I love that. Because a lot of my former colleagues, my social worker friends, they are still in the field because they can't imagine leaving behind the people that they currently serve, because honestly, that just makes their lives worse. Like these people who already live in the bottom rung of our capitalist hell, right? They are struggling and fighting to survive day to day, you know, hour to hour, you know, sometimes. Like these are not even concepts they get to even ponder, right? So so I definitely don't have any disdain for my colleagues who are still in the field, because that is what kept me in the field for as long as I was, is that how like, while I am breaking down as much capitalism as I can and pushing for abolition and doing all these things, I mean, I personally left the field because I had like a breakdown. I couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance that was involved in trying to work within the system for myself. And so I have relied a lot on the lived experiences of people like Bria, of people like Brooklyn, of people like Alex, people who, and even September probably doesn't remember, but we were at a conference a couple of years ago, and like, I was, and also my 16-year-old daughter were really influenced by that, because people who are already living this experience are, you know, if nobody's living this experience because everybody can't have it, then you know, how do we get it? I mean, this is one of these things that I've rolled around in my mind for a long time now, is like, how do we be free ourselves and see these other people not free yet? And like the moral conundrum that racks my brain from that in and of itself. How can I be living this life that I, you know, providing this unschooling life for my kids because of my privilege, right? And then I'm so plugged in with so many people who cannot do that for myriad reasons, not just economic. You know, it doesn't even occur to a lot of people. So, so it's so important to have people who are living this experience. For those of us who are new to it, and people who have never heard of it, to even have something to strive for. It's almost like what people who've been unschooling for a long time, I see that as like visionary futuring almost for myself. It's something for me to draw on because I come from roots that could never have imagined leaving school behind and grades behind and grade levels and all that. And so I definitely feel the pull back and forth, but I'm so grateful for people who are living this so I can see it. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I'll stop.
So I just want to draw one of the things that's come to my mind a lot about this, and like, you know, the abolition, I see a connection between the hierarchies that are instituted in school and what people accept in school. Then, you know, the ranking and filing in school is just like the beginning of what people accept later as the carceral system in America, except it gets further away, right? Where you don't have to see it, right? You don't know where the prison is. You don't have to know who's in it. So that's why I want to bring it back around to our responsibility to those kids that don't have access to this and like parts of the public school system that we could even chip away at. Like I started following the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint after like a few of my friends had their children secluded and restrained in public school. So in some places, schools are literally prisons, you know, or are the direct avenue, you know, to the juvenile detention system and the carceral system for adults. The opposite of healing and trauma-informed practices.
Or they're training kids to submit to authority on a daily basis and training kids to think that that's what surviving in the world is like and should be. And that's how they do it.
So I have a question for everybody here, and this is, you know, totally related, but on how we can, you know, make sure we're not stepping out and we're, you know, we're advocating for these kids. We're advocating to for abolition. And I've come across a lot of problems with this. It's like, how do I, you know, and how do we all go about, like, where is our place in, you know, I hear a lot of progressives say like funding public schools, like where are those funds going to, and like what's that going to be, right? Like, I don't know if that's really harm reduction, right? Or obviously want to end policing in schools, but like how should I, you know, how do we feel about unions? Like, what is the role of the teachers union? Obviously it's really good, but then there's all these teachers unions that, and these teachers that are using all these methods that are causing more trauma, you know, and we're getting into this endless cycle. And I went to a school that for only a few months that was a literal jail in Chicago, full on security, cops every morning, 30 minutes of security, sometimes in a line. You swipe in your ID, they scan you in, they lock you in the lunchroom, you know, you let the bell ring, you got 1 minute to go to your class, you're trapped in there for 8 hours, you know? So I guess it's a question to all of you here, because I'm not that experienced, how we go about being with these people and advocating for some kind of change without causing more oppression and hierarchies.
So one thing that that I'm involved in here in Nashville, Tennessee, is a program, and I recommend you all go and check it out, because I feel like these local programs that are popping up that are founded by African Americans who are in communities that are dealing with these incarceration rates and all of the statistics that Brooklyn just put through. People have been doing grassroots movement work in these communities to defund police and all of this movements that you're seeing, especially in the past few months, that have been going on all along, but in the mainstream, they're starting to like present themselves as like, oh, people that are in the mainstream know about these things now. Like, I know people that years ago, I've been saying defund police for years in this like niche community. And now I have people that, I'd never consider being like, we need to defund the police because da 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 da. And you're like, oh, it's starting to kind of seep into the mainstream, which if we're gonna break down institutions, like these are the way, the fact that we're seeing this is huge. And I think that this year and the pandemic and how everybody just kind of had to sit and watch, and then how affected so many people were all of a sudden, even though Black people have been dying for years in our country, like our country is founded on Black people dying, but all of a sudden this year, things have really ramped up. But in our country, we have a organization called Gideon's Army, and they specifically work to create restorative justice practices within, oh my God, my cat, within all systems in our community that work with children. Now they're in a specific zip code. 37208 is one of the highest for incarceration in the country, and it's right here in North Nashville. They are located there, but the programs that they create are ones that if we can work on funding, reallocating those funds from militarized policing, which has exploded since we became afraid after 9/11, and that was a great excuse to just militarize and bring the money into the police state, and really ramp it up. If we can work on the programs where we're getting defunding and we're putting it into these grassroots organizations that then can be replicated across communities, I feel I do not have a lot of hope in general. I'm a pretty like, but those kinds of things, and it's happening in a lot of layers, in a lot of aspects. I know it's happening in Minnesota after what happened with George Floyd. And I know that is not specific to SDE, but it's a way to work on this, and it's a long game, and it ends up supporting elements of what we are trying to do in terms of creating communities, if that makes sense. Thanks.
I just wanted, what you said, the long game. I feel like being an abolitionist is definitely understanding the long game. You may plant the vine, but you won't drink the wine. And it's still a really worthy pursuit. Anything you can do to push towards it for the future.
May I ask a question to the group? The little bit of abolitionist education that I've read, and I admittedly it hasn't been a lot. A lot of it that I've seen is, yeah, we need to abolish schools, we need to tear down the system, and here's the curriculum that we're going to implement after we've torn down the schools. And it's been rather disheartening to me because in my mind, especially from a youth rights perspective, it's like, hey, let's tear down the system and put up this system that doesn't respect youth rights whatsoever. Is that something other people are seeing? And I'm just wondering other people's experiences and thoughts on that.
I would agree with that for perspective. I think this photo for us is to, as someone said earlier, to acknowledge where other people are and, try to pull them in our direction. But I don't have any answers for that, so that's why I'm here.
So I feel like the unwillingness to, like when I was done with public school, I just wanted to like take off, and the unwillingness to kind of engage. I feel like that's kind of this whiteness. That's part of the whiteness, to just like be nice about it instead of be like aggressive or like to really like point it out. And especially when it comes with youth rights and parenting, and there's all this judgment, and it's this weird dynamic amongst parents. So I think that also plays into this like pervasive whiteness and politeness around what's really a toxic place, especially if it's not affecting your child. Your kid isn't going to jail and your kid isn't being put in the box. Yeah, so that was what I was thinking about, is that I just think about how my grandma was, because I guess I just whenever I think about this, think about how my grandma wanted to be all polite, and how I would, if I tried to explain to her that she should stop sponsoring that African child and forcing them into a school system, and why I thought that was wrong, like how that would just be like, that's what I'd like to do to like all the educators in America.
I agree with you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Emil.
I was going to say, I get what you mean about sort of the whiteness perspective and politeness and standing back, but and maybe I'm making excuses for myself. I've thought about trying to be involved in the school board with 2 kids that have never been to school, and I feel uncomfortable in a sense of not having standing or something. It's like, it feels weird to show up and push really hard for school to go in some direction that I'm like, you know what, whatever you do, I don't think my kids are going to go here. Like, we're happy where we are, and I don't foresee things changing till they're old, right? Like, so I'm curious if other people have engaged in school boards or sort of at the local level and trying to change while not being in the school system.
I have. I have here. I just have a lot of friends who are teachers, and just with the whole pandemic thing, I've been really watching board meetings, and I actually know a couple people on the school board where I live. And I also go to meetings of the League of Education Voters here, just to see if I can broaden their discussion of what education is. And it's actually been really cool, because I end up not so much affecting the leaders so much, although they do go, but then there's always like a few people who like engage me for extra conversation at the end of the meeting or whatever it is about, like, so, well, what's that about? And it's, mostly educators who are working in the system who come to these meetings. So I don't know. I don't know that I'm helping any system deconstructing at all, but I do it because I don't know why.
Doing recognizance. Just checking it out. Report back to us what they're all about.
Brooklyn, I was wondering if you could speak to one thing that I run up, or anybody speak to it, actually, anybody. I just said Brooklyn because yeah. So one thing I hear from social workers is like, yeah, abolition would be awesome, but it's going to be just like deinstitutionalization was in the 60s and 70s and continuing into the 80s, and technically it started in the 50s. But yeah, so we could debate on that. But basically, they did a good thing by closing a lot of the large mental institutions, what they called them, and but did not then fund alternatives to that. They wanted people to have care in the community, and that the funding for the alternatives just never actually materialized. So it actually, I love Ruben when he said harm reduction, because I think about harm reduction a lot, and wondering if abolition is the path to harm reduction, being that we are still operating within a governmental and economic system that we currently have. Like, I almost wonder if, like, I don't know, like, do we need to change the whole system? And then, you know what I mean? Like, I get this question a lot from colleagues and stuff, so.
Some of the, like I mentioned, the ending the compulsory schooling laws, and the other one that comes to mind, oh God, I just lost it. Yeah, and pushing for the trauma-informed stuff. I feel like that's harm reduction. Like, if we can get people to understand the new, like, how brains work and how trauma works. Like, I mean, you expect educators to be, you know, believe in science, maybe. I don't know. I mean, if we don't change things, then we'll just, I mean, we have a crisis in America of like critical thinking, and all of these people went to the public school system, right? And so there, it's whatever we're doing is just like is not working, and it's making like fascist white people and putting all Black and brown people in prison. And you know, I just like, when can we start having like a real, like, you know, and if it's just a few things at first, then that would be good. I mean, every 12 years is another chunk of kids that we've traumatized. So anything we can do to make their lives better would be good.
Absolutely. You just reminded me of, I was going back on the Unschooling and Decolonization Facebook page, and I don't know if people watched that video that Zakia shared about the authoritarian parenting and how we got here or whatever. I don't know if people watched that, but it's just a really good overview. And exactly, it's interesting, the thing, it's like, where do we could point people in so many directions. I think also the history of education. I talk to teachers that barely know anything, right? So it's like, you could go the history route, you could go the cognitive science route. It's like, we have all of these things that are behind us. It's just like, where do we even go? There's just so much information here to stop these oppressive systems. And I feel like there's just this denial, like, you know, people are believing in like a myth, basically.
Yeah, I think when you're trying to get to the upper level, convince the masses, you're just going to hit brick walls every single time. And really where I found energy and hope is in like local organizing, and it feels small, but it's actually doing something. And if you can just keep building those local organizing on different levels of like mutual aid, abolition, prison support, that's where change is going to come. Because then if it's big enough, people see that it's doing something, and you can point to it as an example of like, this is what you do if you defund the police. Like, this is what we can do when we organize around community, as opposed to trying to come from the top down and change people's minds first. I just don't think it's going to happen.
I totally agree with you, Bria, on a fundamental level. I just wonder if we could do something like, you know, how helpful it would be for people to set along that journey if there wasn't like like federal standards for curriculum that like shackle the hands of all the educators, so that when you bring something up or when they have a different idea, they really can't institute that because they're being like controlled from above, right? And maybe different states handle that differently. There was a lot less scrutiny on homeschooling in Montana than there is here in Oregon, which like puts my family at risk. You know, I feel like my unschooling is at risk in Oregon more than it was in Montana because of the laws that, you know, want to keep track and make sure that homeschoolers are on this specific conventional path. So those are some things that I'd like to see change to maybe protect our community and other kids.
Yeah, you find that red states, good to go for homeschooling, which is so hard. And because the I mean, I hate to be judgy, but the crazy people that are like, you know, off teaching their kids like creationism and so, I mean, nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. I mean, if that's what you want to do, but like they have no concept of science, they're protected in GOP states like Tennessee. That, I mean, I don't ever have to worry about losing homeschooling because they would lose it. And the money that they have funneling through the system, these religious institutions that have their own homeschool networks, it's never going to go away. But you get blue states that just want to fund public schools and support the system. And you get why everybody's so frustrated with with each other, because it's almost like shooting yourself in the foot in the name of progress on so many levels. Ugh.
In Montana, it's the Mennonite community and the Amish community in Montana that really like puts money into protecting homes, like their education system. And they have like, you'll go to their like capitalist store, grocery store, where they sell like second run groceries, and like little 13-year-olds are like ringing you out. They're really competent. It's fascinating.
It's true though. It feels like every decision that we try to make in maybe like an abolitionist or anarchist or against the state point of view is actually a decision that could get us into legal trouble. And how do you live that kind of life where you want to like take care of people and live in that freedom, but you can get into fucking legal trouble? Like that's what I'm running into every time I think about these decisions. I'm not gonna like steal from someone. I'm not talking about that kind of thing, but they regulate everything. They regulate mutual aid, like they regulate money to each other. So what do you do when everything's regulated and against the law?
Especially if you're part of a marginalized community. So like, for instance, a lot of times in Washington, they never check your homeschooling records unless you're getting divorced. There's some kind of a child protection concern, or there's some like other, they can make up anything, right, for certain races. So so that is a big thing where I, as a white person in a pretty regular, you know, middle class household, don't have to worry about it. That, I mean, it's a major issue for others, and I can't ignore that. It's not in my blood.
On a quick side note, about 10 years ago, I got rid of my car and I've been riding a bike ever since. Now I live in Brooklyn, New York, so that's possible. But one of the most interesting observations I've made is how little contact I have with the police now that I don't own a car. Just gonna leave that one out there.
See, and there's something about like leaving a car behind that's very similar, probably, I think, to leaving school behind, is that a bunch of other things change in what decisions you can make, and you know how you live your life change a lot just off of that one decision. I bet you agree. I have a car, but I hate driving it.
Do any of y'all feel super hopeful? I'm sorry, y'all are gonna learn. My outlook on life is expect the worst and be pleasantly surprised when things go well. So, but does anybody since pandemic have like an inkling of like, and again, it's long game, but like the people that had to stop their like high speed life for 2 minutes, even though it was super uncomfortable, like they started to see how things could change. Now they went immediately back to it, but I feel like those are those little spark moments that I know we want to solve all the problems like immediately, right? Like we want it to just like change and be good for everybody like 250 years ago, right? And that's not going to happen, right? But do any of y'all have hope for people that maybe were in mainstream that you are still connected to, that are looking at things and really taking the time in a different way than they were prior to March 2020? I'm just wondering.
School. That's all I'll say. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I was actually completely shocked that not one person I know with young kids in elementary school seriously considered being just like, it doesn't make sense to do remote school for kids under 10. Like, we should just not enroll them this year. But nope.
I don't know if
I
people
see a
saw my
lot of people. Go ahead.
I don't know if people saw my comment the other day, but with all due respect to AOC, she just set up a homework help center, and I was like smacking my face. I'm like, you're forcing children to do homework while there's a pandemic with all of their other trauma, not being able to go outside and see anybody. And this is what's happening at the most leftist level of any politician in the US. So I'm hopeful about some things because I see a lot of people my age, young people, supporting the right things and setting up more mutual aid and just kind of getting out of the individualist colonial mindset. But other part of me is pessimistic because I just got blocked by 2 people yesterday on Facebook for criticizing Biden's economic picks, saying that I was a Trumpist. So I'm not sure.
I'm really hopeful because right when the uprising began, I had a real strong desire to have a conversation about the intersection of abolition and Black Lives Matter and self-directed education. And I didn't know how to have that conversation. And when True Network came up, I was like, this is exactly what I was looking for, is that people who are interested in the deeper issues that come up in SDE and what they mean to our life on a meta scale. So I'm really, really thankful for everyone joining me today on such short notice and discussing this and sharing your thoughts. And that makes me very hopeful because I felt really alone many times in the last year.
I just want to add on a high note that it's probably the network I'm in, but a lot of people are leaving school. A lot of people of color are questioning school at way higher rates from what I've seen, especially because they can see how the teachers are treating their kids when their kids are home on the screens and they can hear it. But yeah, it's not like mass exodus like I'm sure we would like, but it's a lot more people are like, what the fuck is up with school, and choosing to leave right now.
I've heard that too from friends. I think witnessing, parents actually hearing and seeing what's happening in the classrooms is this big aha moment for a lot of parents, and they're not happy with it.
That moment was probably in my kids' first grade when we went to visit the first grade teacher, knew nothing about my child. I don't know what they were told me a couple things, but it was they obviously knew very, very little about them as a person. I'm doesn't seem very. So we're coming up on 5:30. If anyone has anything else to share, otherwise we could just close it out and continue the conversation on the network. Good. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brooklyn, for hosting this.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for hosting this. It's such a good conversation to have.
Yeah, I hope we continue it.
Yeah, let's keep doing it.
Brooklyn, I would love to see your slides.
Okay. Maybe Alex, could you help me put them on a tiny URL like yours?
Sure, you want to just ping me after this?
Yeah. Thank you.
Message me after this. That was tech talk. Sorry.
That's all right. I speak that language.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. See you guys later.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.